In the United States, gun ownership is guaranteed under the Second Amendment of the Constitution. However, it's hotly debated. Silvio Calabi is the author of the Gun Book for Boys and joins me now. Silvio, welcome.
Thank you, Jerry.
Good to have you. Despite that guarantee in the Constitution, can you have a civil debate about guns in America?
Well, I think once you get off TV, it is possible to have a civil debate. But that's one of the reasons we wrote this book, to try to bring some common sense and civility to the debate. Even though the book is not at all political, it's entirely fact-based, and we believe that if people read it and took it to heart, tragedies like this would be very much reduced.
Well, what would have been learned? A lesson by the young lad in this case, by the police, by both?
Well, certainly by that poor boy. In fact, we mentioned exactly this scenario. This isn't the first time a police officer has felt compelled to shoot a child with what he or she thought was a gun. It happens not often, but it certainly has happened before. And as one of your earlier presenters mentioned, these Airsoft replica guns are incredibly close copies of the real thing. And even an expert from across the room can't tell the difference between what amounts to a pellet gun and a real gun. In fact, some of them you can't tell the difference until you pick them up.
Is it then unwise to provide one of these, especially to an urban child who would go out into an area where people are concerned about gun violence?
Well, I think that with any sort of a gun comes the responsibility to learn to use it, or the responsibility to teach the person to whom you've given this gun, whatever it is, the safe way to handle it and keep it. You know, it's very tempting, it's politically expedient for us to say, well, the answer to bad behavior or unfortunate behavior is just to declare it illegal, and then the problem's gone. But of course, we know that's not the case. There's really no substitute for firearms safety training.
Well, I would agree with you. I mean, I grew up in rural Canada. I took gun safety training when I was a kid, both officially and, of course, from my family, all rural people and familiar with guns. I'm a licensed gun owner in Canada. I have the license, but I wouldn't carry around a real-looking fake gun or a real gun in an area where there are gangs and concerns about violence. It's just not sensible.
Well, it isn't, but you're not 12 years old anymore either.
That's right.
You know, it's hard to know what this kid was thinking. Mind you, in an area where there are guns, where there are gangs, and where guns are in play, there's a temptation to think, well, I've got to have one too to protect myself. But that's no way for a 12-year-old to think, obviously.
Do you think that in some cases, I mean, I think you were trying to allude to it only happening on television, but I lived for a couple of decades actually in the United States and very often had this same kind of debate. Certainly I had it on radio, which is what I did in the United States, but also, you know, at dinner parties. I think people really stake out, just like with abortion or now race relations in many ways in the United States, these are things where people stake out a side and they're just not going to move.
Yeah, that's increasingly becoming so. You mentioned, however, that you grew up in a rural area, and I didn't. I grew up just outside Boston, but I have now lived in rural New England for all of my adult life, and dinner parties here are a little different, let's say, than they might be in you know, the Upper West Side of Manhattan. People are more comfortable with guns in a place like Maine, or possibly where you grew up in Canada. But generally, certainly in the urban parts of our countries, this polarization seems to be true for all kinds of issues, doesn't it?
Yep, yes, increasingly, and that's unfortunate. The Gun Book for Boys, is that a how-to manual? I mean, if a boy's going to have a gun, he needs to read this? You're encouraging ownership?
Yes, we certainly are. I mean, my two co-authors and I grew up with guns, grew up shooting. We've actually, a couple of us have made a living from guns directly or indirectly. we certainly see nothing inherently evil in them. They're tools, just like a chainsaw or a hammer or an automobile, for that matter. But shooting well is a hard-won skill that can be extremely rewarding. The book, as I say, is not political. It's not about self-defense either.
Okay.
It's about understanding guns, understanding how they work, understanding the history behind guns in the U.S. We're criticized around the world in some cases for our gun culture.
Yeah.
And if you look at American history, it's very easy to see where this gun culture came from.
All right.
And then if you look at popular entertainment now, you see it's only fomented.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
You bet.